Here's a cup, and here is a lid. By the way, the tableware for meals looks like this. A porcelain teapot that you got from your grandmother, or maybe from your great-grandmother. Traditional cups with saucers. And this is one of the masterpieces of Chinese production, a travelling tea bottle. Good afternoon, dear friends. My name is Sergey and today we continue our series of videos, The ABC of Tea, that summarizes my experience in tea. The ABC of tea is basic information that will be useful for all those who are starting to take an interest in tea. So if you like tea and want to learn more about it, then put the kettle on, sit down and get comfortable, and we'll start. Today's episode focuses on the ways of brewing tea. As you see, I have a wide choice of teaware in front of me, various kinds. Actually, if I tried to put in the video all the different variations of teaware around the world, I think they wouldn't fit here, and it would take a lot of time. But today I'll just go through all the basic ways of brewing tea, and talk about their advantages and disadvantages. By the way, imagine that I went to the kitchen of a Tuareg or Senegalese, for example, or other minority people, and I see that they brew tea in very basic conditions, in a teapot like this. By the way, I got it in the mountain region of Southeast Asia, southern China. A teapot of this type, with a sort of straw inside, some herbs maybe. And they boil this over a fire. The Chinese would have tasty tea sometimes, but in some African areas it can be total straw. I was there just recently, and I said to them, "You drink an awful tea, how can you? It's impossible to drink, it's terrible." And they looked at me and said, "Look dude, we've drunk tea this way for 400 years, and we know how to drink it." And they're right, this is their tradition that formed like that. And after all, in the world, there's a huge number of ways of consuming tea. They have different forms in different peoples. Presumably, the most familiar method of brewing tea for you is a porcelain teapot that you got from your grandmother, or maybe from your great-grandmother. Our traditional cups with saucers. The European brewing method. You rinse the teapot with boiled water, put the tea inside to taste. 5 or 10 or 20 grams, as you prefer. Some people like stronger tea. Then you wait. Cover it with an oven mitten or a towel. Use whatever you want to keep it warm. Then let it steep and rest for some time, and then pour it into cups. Some people like to add sugar. Others always drink it without sugar. Today I won't tell you what methods are good or bad, but I will try to discuss all of them, and you can make your own conclusion. As I already said, different people use very different ways of brewing. Nowadays we can safely say that very modern ways of brewing have appeared. I talked already about the ordinary iron kettles. Next, in Asia such kettles are often used, although they're mostly used for water. It's called a shuihu. In Japan and Taiwan, people only boil water in such kettles, and then brew tea with this water in the traditional teaware. But some people use these big kettles, especially for brewing tea. In Asia, the way of a cup with a lid or gaiwan is very common. Here we see a Japanese gaiwan. Here's a cup, here's a lid. By the way, the bowl for meals looks like this. This is wan, a cup for food. This is a lid. So you can brew tea, or you can have a meal. The Chinese gaiwan is a more modern form. It has a saucer. It's got stuck slightly. Yeah, a saucer. We hold it like this and pour the tea out of here. It's a very fast and convenient method of brewing. because you can wash the teaware easily, rinse it easily, get out tea and brew it once again. It's often used in southern China. Actually, now it's spread far beyond the bounds of China, in other provinces. You can find it anywhere. But surely the most famous vessel for brewing tea in the whole world is the teapot. I have a classical Chinese Yixing teapot on the table. But as I said, we know about the European ones. Next, there are glass teapots, or made of other materials, with a strainer. You put the tea there, infuse it, and have something interesting. Depends on the tea that you put in. I usually recommend such teapots for brewing herbs, because infusing is not the best way, but we'll move on to it later. By the way, it's an interesting issue. I talked about Shefir earlier. Some people believe that it's usually prepared only in our jails, but it's not true at all. Nomadic tribes from the Arabian Peninsula and some Asian minorities also brew tea in these kettles. They boil it with butter. As you know, there's Kalmyk tea, Tibetan tea, various kinds of salty tea from Central Asia, where tea plays a role of nutritious food, as it did in ancient times. Later, the ceremonious approach appeared, and a more attentive way of brewing, and it all came to a head in Asia, in the form of traditional Chinese and Japanese tea ceremonies. By the way, such ancient and primitive ways of making tea, like milling tea to dust, still exist in Japan. Because as you probably know, there's a tea called matcha there, a powdered green tea that people prepare in bowls. They put the tea here, whip it with a special bamboo whisk, first with a small amount of water, then they add boiled water and drink it right from the bowl. It's a very traditional and ancient technique that appeared in China more than 1,000 years ago. It was described by the renowned Chinese poet and promoter of tea, Lu Yu, in his work The Classic of Tea. In our time, this technology has a primitive and ceremonial form. For example, in northern India, people still mill low-grade, undrinkable tea. In Japan, meanwhile, they have more ceremony. Having seen this in Chinese teaware, many people who start getting acquainted with the Chinese tradition start thinking, it turns out that I brewed tea incorrectly all my life. Should I change all my habits? As a matter of fact, you shouldn't be afraid. All of us always change our habits somehow, develop ourselves, learn new things. It's very good. I have to say that all the people that I mentioned, and more primitive methods of brewing tea, such as infusing tea or boiling it with herbs, though this is not always a primitive method. It can be good if you have good tea, but it's very important to say that due to the lack of high-quality tea, and more poor people still don't have it, there's not much good tea in India. Tea produced in Turkey, Iran and other countries was always considered to be of a lower grade and was supplied to the mass market. And this situation hasn't changed. It's still the same. And the Asian tea, Japanese, Taiwanese, Chinese, was always assessed more highly. Consequently, the techniques of brewing this tea are more sophisticated because you can pull out more healthy and tasty aromatic compounds from this tea. You can get a more rich aftertaste, fragrance and flavour, everything that this mass tea from the other countries doesn't have. It was here where all these primitive ways of brewing emerged, with many additives, then flavourings in modern tea, just in order to get something from the straw that has no taste. Various sorts of additives were invented. Good tea doesn't need these, so we prepare it more carefully. So now I'll tell you about the methods of brewing. It will be simple and clear at the same time, and we'll extract the maximum flavour from the tea. First of all, I have a special table called a charban, or tea tray. As a matter of fact, it's not necessary to brew on this table. There's also a Taiwanese way of brewing, where you lay a rag down like I did. It's called ganpao or dry brewing, but the essence is the same. You have one small vessel, one intermediate vessel. In Asia it's called a gong dao bei, meaning a cup of justice, or cha hai sometimes, and a cup. All the rest are the optional elements, tea tools, a teapot. But these don't concern brewing tea itself. I won't talk about them today. Now I'm brewing tea in the Chinese style. The ceremony is called, it's not a ceremony. It's better to call it a tasting of tea, pin cha, because there is also a ceremonial brewing, gong fu cha, where a lot of attention is paid to the elements and subtle details, that are more related to presentation and aesthetics of tea than usability. Today, I will talk exclusively about the practice of brewing tea and about things that are important to pull out from the taste and aroma of tea. Then we fill it with boiling water. Boiling water is necessary for practically all types of tea. I won't go deep into the correctness and nuances of Chinese brewing, because we can make a whole episode about it. There are plenty of nuances. Anyway, the most critical nuances are these. The first steeping is poured out in most cases. It's a hygienic procedure. We don't drink it, although there are some types you don't need to pour out. For example, when I brew now, this is an aged tea. By the way, you can always smell the aroma from the vessel, the cup of justice. It's very pleasant too, and the following steeping is drinkable. In reality, of course, not all Chinese people make tea like this. Many people who take interest in tea think, I'll go to China and I'll see the tea masters everywhere who are skilled in tea. But it's not true for sure. That's why for the Chinese mass market, the Chinese invented a way of simplifying this brewing. It's called a teapot. Some people call it a gongfu chainik in Russia, and by plenty of other names. This is a simple glass vessel. In essence, this is a mug with a handle, with a clever device inside. This is plastic. It's made of good plastic, thermoplastic. It doesn't influence the taste of tea. They can be of different quality, but this is ours. It's very good with a cool valve. So how does it work? You put some tea inside, bring them together, pour boiling water, push the button and tea pours out. I'll show you. Now I'll just pour hot water into it. Let's imagine that we have tea there. You can see very well without tea how it works. I push this button and the water goes down there. So you can control the quantity of tea by putting a small or a large amount, and also the brewing time. You can brew stronger or lighter. Then you simply draw it out. You can cover it to keep the leaves warm, and pour it into cups, or even drink right from it as you wish. Here you get 3-in-1, a simplified method of traditional Chinese brewing, embodied in this teapot. Of course, if you drink tea for a long time, and take a serious interest in it, you want to immerse yourself in this business, because it is beautiful, it is aesthetic. This manner is used for offices on the run. Everybody who's passionate about tea, they prefer a traditional brewing method, but a teapot will be convenient enough at the beginning, or for a fast brewing. Apart from the teapot, there is another way of fast brewing. This is a travelling tea bottle. By the way, they're sold in our shop. In my opinion, this is one of the masterpieces of Chinese production. It consists of 3 parts: a lower glass, a higher small glass, and a steel mesh filter. Everything is very simple. You put the tea here, then close it. Fill up this section with boiling water. Close it. Turn it upside down. And the boiling water falls through the mesh filter and the tea brews. You control the intensity of the brewing by turning the bottle. Your tea begins to mix. Now I'll show it to you, so it'll be more clear. Such bottles are used more often on the road by the Chinese. This is a really perfect option to take in a car with you, or somewhere else. Although, about cars, I will say later one more brewing method that's more suitable for Russian tea lovers. Here I put the tea inside. Then I close it with the filter. Pour boiling water. Yeah. Till the thread, and then close it. I'm slowly turning it upside down. You see the water gets to the tea. What's good about it is that it's double-sided glass. Some other bottles are made of plastic, with one-sided glass as well. Firstly, the tea cools very fast in such bottles. The second, they burn you and burst frequently. This particular model is very good. This is a proven method. We've worked with a different producer before. Now we work with this one. The tea brewed. As you can see, the infusion already got some colour. And I can turn it back, and that's all. Tea is not too strong, because the tea leaves are not long in the hot water. It's very important, by the way, as well as in the case of correct Chinese brewing. And later I'll also speak about Japanese brewing. But even in this bottle and teapot, the tea leaf should never stay too long infusing in the water. It's important, otherwise it won't release the extra substances. Tea is not too bitter and strong, and always has a delicate and subtle taste, regardless of what kind of brewing you apply. It's very important not to infuse tea too long, that's all. Then we open and drink right from the bottle. An excellent delicious tea. Then you can repeat this procedure, depending on the quality of tea and on how many times it can be brewed. Good tea can be brewed many times. There are also more simple ways, various glasses, like this, different devices to filter tea leaves, just a mug with a lid, naturally different tea bags, but we'll discuss those separately. On the whole, I don't consider them teas. There are techniques of boiling tea. For example, there's a widespread method in Russia called boiling tea following Lu Yu. Actually, these glass teapots didn't exist in his time. Nevertheless, it's an adapted modern method that emerged in Russian tea clubs and successfully spread. The method of boiling on an open fire a large amount of tea, about 2 litres. This particular teapot holds 1.8 litres. Very convenient. Made of heat-resistant glass. You boil tea on the open fire. In boiling, the tea opens a more powerful taste. The hints can appear that you cannot get in fast infusion in pouring. But a big difference between boiling and infusing in a classical teapot, for example, is that the tea doesn't become too strong. It boils, then you quickly pour it into another vessel, and the tea gives a more rich taste. Of course, I could talk a lot more about the various details of brewing tea. I only touched the basics. There's also a great number of brewing methods. For example, I have an Yixing teapot here. The teapot's made of other materials, porcelain teapots. Teapots made of other types of clay. They're of different size, gaiwans. I already talked about them. There are the different options. Japanese gaiwans, shiboridashi and the like. There are many nuances here. The same concerns the cups of different shapes. For example, this is a jade cup. This is a porcelain one. They can be of clay, of different shape and size and so on. These are all just small nuances, but this is a different topic. But I'd like to discuss one more important thing, about brewing in a car, I promised. What way is the most effective? You should take any touristic thermos flask, kind of this, a thermos with a screw cap. You can use steel ones because glass can be broken. The plus to this is it often has a lid. I have a classical thermos, a Chinese one that everyone knows. It fits perfectly for brewing in stationary conditions. The cork. It saves heat for a long time. It has a glass flask, but it's not handy on the road. It's often used in China. They brew tea right inside in such big thermoses, especially in the highlands. And this thermos is very good for the road. You can put Puer inside, the most undemanding for brewing. 20 grams, 30 or 10, depending on your taste, and on the type of Puer. If it has more leaves than buds, you can put more tea, and vice versa. Then simply pour water and hit the road. And you can also add more tea on the way. This method is the most elementary. A little more perfect way is when you brew like this, and pour it from the middle vessel into the thermos instead of a cup. So you pour the ready tea in the thermos without the tea leaves, so your tea won't be too strong. You can brew not only Puer in such a way, but some other sorts too, and you'll have a good and tasty drink with you. What about boiling tea? As I already mentioned at the very beginning, this is the most ancient method of making tea, and it's essentially associated with the low quality. When you use the most low-grade tea and so on, you can often see mountain peoples doing this, nomad peoples in Central Asia. They don't think so much about the quality of the tea. The properties are more important. It has to give a good invigorating effect and help to bear the brunt of hard everyday life of nomad people. Boiling in the glass teapot that I described now is a more elegant way. It aims at the flavour of a more high standard. Apart from the simplified methods of brewing that I showed now, the teapot, bottle, infusing, may be brewing in glass teapots. There are more elaborate ways of brewing, and it's not the most difficult method that I'm using now. Chinese technology, pin cha, or tasting of tea. There's also a Japanese tea ceremony that's truly even more ritualized, because it's natural for Japanese people to pay more attention to details in general. I already talked about the powdered Japanese tea that's brewed in such cha wans. And there's also Japanese teaware for tea ceremony. It differs a little from Chinese ware. Mostly it's such teapots with handles on the sides, instead of a handle which is well known for Europeans. Next, cups of this shape are more usual. Generally they resemble Chinese ones, but often in a Japanese tea ceremony, even more attention is paid to the ritual aspects. Attention, focusing on actions, movements. All of these details refer not so much to the taste of the prepared beverage as to the aesthetics of the ritual and enjoying the beauty of brewing. In reality, I believe that this is also an essential part of the meaning of tea ceremony, because tea is a social beverage, and if you learn to brew it beautifully and correctly, to reach more taste and deliver the most interesting aroma of tea, it will certainly give you more enjoyment on the whole. Though seemingly these elements of appearance cannot be understood right now, it's not evident that this is not just for beauty, but has a practical value. By the way, in order to get immersed in it, you should begin with the little things, the most simple intermediate methods that I showed you. It's not necessary to study the ceremony right now. Eventually, you'll want to become more expert in it, mostly by yourself, and you'll start feeling the nuances of taste, and know which teaware to use for different teas, and the difference between, say, a teapot and a gaiwan. Why we need to cool water for some teas, green, light teas. It's better to brew the fermented teas in a teapot, light teas in a gaiwan, and many nuances like this. At the beginning, it can seem quite complicated, but later, it harmoniously enters your life and fills it up with wonderful, joyful emotions. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel and see you soon.